Well, welcome everyone. This is Joanne Geer. I am Executive Director for the Westchester Biotech Project, and we really welcome you to this webinar on shaping programs around commercial elements with Dr. Roland Turck. The Westchester Biotech Project just launched about a year ago, and we are largely, for about a year, we've been convening people in different size groups to learn about what they're involved with, what their challenges are, and so on. We just recently had our Innovation in Research Symposium. The second one was a couple weeks ago. And in a couple weeks, on July 18th, will be our Rare Disease Symposium at Iona College. That's got a wonderful agenda. We actually have some new speakers to put on the website, but it's up there on our site and pretty exciting. You can see we have some presence in all the social media environments, and we invite anyone who likes to do that kind of thing to get in touch with us, because we'd love to have more people who are sharing news through the various networks. We talk about we've identified what we think is a new term of art, and nobody's argued with us, which we call opportunity density. And the idea is that, in a place like Westchester County, New York, there is certainly a great deal of research going on, discovery research, clinical research, post-release research, big data research, you name it. And we are pulling people together to talk to each other amongst researchers, engineers, and data scientists. In addition, so we've been listening to what are the challenges in the area, and among them are, if a scientist moves to, let's say, an environment like some of the big ones we know, New York, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, that if the little company, the startup they've gone to work for blows up, well, there may well be 30 other opportunities in the neighborhood. And so while the density in a place like Westchester County may not be as intense, it's probably bigger than people perceive. So we're working on dynamic asset mapping in order to have a benchmark of where we are today and to watch the biotech cluster grow and see where we can get to in 10 years. We have a number of programs that are in the works, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. But we have many different kinds of touch points. So as we get to know folks, and we invite you to be in touch with us and learn about what your interests are, there's very likely to be something in place that would intrigue you. And if not, maybe we'll build something together. I love this quote from Carla Romney, and she's been a really great advocate for the work we're doing. She's a poster child for building the biotech cluster in the region, because she grew up in the area and had to leave to do her education, and has found a way to come back, which has been terrific. I will also add that one of the things we found early on is that virtually everyone in the region who is doing research is collaborating with someone else across the country or internationally. I'm going to let you appreciate all the wonderful different organizations who have been supporting us. And just to speak for a moment about the development of the Rare Disease Research Hub, and one of our champion is on the call today, Dr. Molina, and we'll see how our time goes. I may invite you to say a few words later on, Antonio, that he's just moved his company here from Spain, and we are working on developing a platform. At first, it'll be everything except the building, to bring stakeholders together and ultimately to develop an institute that will be an environment for international researchers to come to the US, have a place to call home with laboratories and all the other elements needed to really have a wonderful accelerator environment. So we continue to build our relationships regionally and beyond to help build that. I'm going to hand things over now to our Associate for Communication, Chris Kenzel, who will take it from here.
Beautiful. Thanks, Joanne. Welcome, everybody. Thanks, Roland, for joining us today. You guys might have read a little bit about Roland. He's a CEO and medical doctor with extensive international biopharma leadership experience and proven small company agility. He's a well-regarded advisor with extensive experience in change leadership, commercialization, specialty medicine, strategy, business building, and global markets. And he has been the president and in leadership positions in multiple companies, extensive experience leading groups in specialty medicine, including Bayer, Formula Pharmaceuticals, Burlex Canada. He's now a managing partner at TurckBio. At TurckBio, they help small and large companies develop and commercialize their specialty medicine assets. And we're really excited to have him here today. He's gonna tell us some ways to incorporate commercial strategy into every stage of a life science product's development, and the kind of market to product thought process that's required. It's kind of that backwards process for a company and its intellectual property to realize their full potential. Thanks for joining us. I'll pass it over to you, Roland, and you can take it whenever.
And thank you. While we're in the transition, I'm going to suggest to everyone that if you have a question, would you please put it into the chat box, and we will address them after Roland's presentation. Thanks so much. Thank you, Roland.
Thanks.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you at the Westchester Biotech project. Very excited to talk with you. It's going to be even more fun if you guys ask some questions. So I will present for some half hour, 40 minutes, whatever, and then open for a dialogue and for questions. And the more questions you have, the more fun it's going to be. So thank you very much, Chris and Joanna, for introducing me. Just a few more words on myself. So I'm, as you can tell by my accent, most likely I'm from Germany originally. I'm a physician trained in Germany and France, in the US. Have worked in big pharma for some 22 or so years, and in my last corporate role, I was president of the Global Specialty Medicine Business Unit at Bayer, and that was the business unit that was responsible for development and commercialization of all specialty medicine assets defined as low volume, high value. And so that included oncology, neurology, rare disease, ophthalmology, and also diagnostic imaging. And those happen to be the areas I've worked in throughout my career, and the areas I consider myself somewhat knowledgeable about. So I have broad and deep operative experience, and what is a little bit more unique both on the clinical development side as well as on the commercialization side. I have run smaller and larger P&Ls and have large pharma experience as well as biotech experience. And I've started my own shop some 3 years ago, TurckBio. I work with management teams and boards, predominantly of biotech companies, also sometimes larger pharma companies, focused on strategy. And the area I'm most passionate about is really this overlap between clinical development and commercialization, and in particular, what companies can do to design their development program in such a way that the likelihood for commercial success and successful reimbursement is increased. I find that to be an area that is not necessarily well covered by big pharma, and that is oftentimes pretty much not covered at all by biotech. And so I find this to be an exciting place to be, and for me to add value to for biotech companies. So at TurckBio, I have a number of strategic alliances with a medical group that helps execute essentially everything medical, from protocol writing to filing INDs, filing submissions. I work with an investment bank for companies that need to raise money. I work with a company that is focused on reimbursement and payer strategy. I also work with a group in Canada that helps me run market research, but also larger commercial projects that require more manpower than I have at TurckBio. And finally, I work with a boutique consulting firm on organizational development, so building companies, expanding companies. And so what all this network has in common is that we're consulting on strategy, but also on what we help from a very executional point of view beyond mere products, and what we're able to handhold and support companies along the way. Okay, but today what I would like to talk about is how to prepare earlier stage companies best for commercial aspects, and how to make sure that a clinical or preclinical early stage company prepares itself optimally for the challenges of competition and reimbursement. Before I do that, I want to talk about the US market a little bit in general. It is really a story of fantastic news. I think we're in a fantastic market. We're in a great country. The opportunities are immense. There are new technologies like it was never the case before. I mean, there are more technologies, more tools available to scientists and developers than all these scientists and developers can really work on. So we're really in the proverbial kid in the candy shop. I think it has never been like that before. Innovation, there are tremendous unmet needs, as we all know. Innovation continues to be rewarded. There's a very solid IP environment, a very professional regulatory environment. And I'm really convinced that growth is very sustainable, despite of what people say about costs in the pharmaceutical sector. Costs are being managed in an inefficient manner, but still in an effective manner, and can be contained. And so the growth trajectory will continue. We will continue to thrive in this environment. Having said that, not everyone will benefit. And I don't know whether you can read the slides on the right-hand side, but this illustrates a little bit where the growth comes from in terms of drug categories as well as therapeutic areas. And what you see is that while the overall growth might be in the 5 to 7% in the pharmaceutical market in the US, in reality, that means that there are huge shifts. Obviously, when drugs lose exclusivity, they lose essentially 90% of their sales in very short period of time. Generics prices have come down. So this is all what you see below in orange and in blue. And the products that really benefit are the innovative products, the new brands, and to some degree price increases. But what really drives growth in this market well below beyond the 5 to 6% is growth with innovative new products. And those products are typically in the specialty medicine area. Most of them follow the low volume, high value logic, be it in oncology, be it in viral diseases, hepatitis or HIV, autoimmune diseases, MS, or other specialty areas. So growth will continue, growth will be dynamic in the specialty area field, and low volume, high value is the business model that will propel that growth more than any other areas. And the good news for us and for our constituency, if you like, is that most of these assets will actually originate from biotech, not from big pharma. If you look at where clinical trials are conducted throughout the world, more than 2/3 of the trials are being conducted by biotech companies, and either alone or in partnership with big pharma. But very clearly, biotech has an absolutely pivotal role to play here. Another factor that is extremely favorable in the US is the reimbursement. And I predict that reimbursement will continue to be very favorable for specialty medicine drugs. And in the graph on the right-hand side, you see availability and reimbursement for, I think they picked 49 cancer drugs that were launched between 2010 and 2014. Availability by country, and you see that most of these drugs are available in the US and everywhere else to a very much lesser degree. So we're living in a very favorable environment from a reimbursement perspective, in particular for oncology drugs. The CMS mandate to cover all or substantially all drugs is extremely helpful, and that is literally what is in the piece of legislation for CMS as far as Part D is concerned. Also, CMS needs to cover at least 2 drugs in various categories, including orphan drugs. So that all helps to create a very favorable environment. Having said all that, there is still a significant hurdle, and that is created by commercial payers that kind of keep the whole system in balance, if you like. And those payers, as well as providers, will make their own judgment about what drugs are worthwhile funding and which ones not. And the essential point is really that drugs will need to provide a meaningful benefit, and a meaningful benefit as compared to competition. That sounds very trivial, and it is probably trivial, but it was not always the case. In the past, incremental innovation or Me Too's were actually dominant. This is very clearly not the case any longer. The paradigm today is breakthrough. As a Me Too, you don't receive premium pricing, and you might not even receive reimbursement. And from a biotech or pharmaceutical company perspective, return on or to get a reasonable return on investment is extremely problematic for a Me Too. So it's all about innovation. It's all about breakthrough innovation. And this innovation is increasingly defined in a way, or from a patient perspective. In the past, and I'll refer a lot to oncology because I mean that's my area of expertise. Beside a couple of other ones, but also it is a very good example for where I believe the whole market will go to. So a couple of years ago, meaningful benefit was defined by statistical difference, for instance, in overall survival curves. So when those curves, or when the 2 groups showed significant difference, that was all you needed for FDA approval and for reimbursement usually. That's not really longer the case because of the judgment that in particular private payers and providers make. Benefits need to be meaningful. They need to provide a meaningful overall survival benefit in the case of cancer, or cure, or quality of life. So this is really critical, and it's also important to understand that the definition of what is meaningful keeps on changing and keeps on going upward. So whereas in the case of cancer, 2 months survival benefit got you approval and reimbursement and everything in commercial success 10 years ago, depending on the space, this is not the case any longer today. In some spaces, you need to show months, really, 4 months, 6 months, in some cases even longer than that. So there is plenty of opportunity, there is plenty of innovation out there, but as a company, you need to deliver meaningful patient benefit. So very quickly, where the paradigm is going and I don't think that's new for anyone, is toward more and more personalization. So again, the example from chemotherapy, but would apply also to other areas. Chemotherapy basically covered all the cancers in the world. The label still does today. We moved on to more targeted therapies that targeted a number of cancers, and it becomes more and more personalized, all the way to specific mutations that can be approved even across different kinds of cancers. At the same time, the number of patients becomes smaller and smaller, while the price goes up, and the market share that can be obtained goes up as well. So this is kind of the paradigm that supports the breakthrough innovation. And whatever you do in your company, whatever you do when you think about development, I think it's important to keep that in mind, that things are going to breakthrough innovation, to high impact, in a lower but very specifically defined population. I see that, by the way, that a couple of questions come up, and I will continue a little bit and then take the questions. I think that will be somewhat easier from a process perspective. Okay, so let's look into development. The traditional development model was really one that I would call sequential. You had your preclinical work, phase 1, that was largely centered around safety, and then phase 2, 3, submission, pre-marketing, and launch. And that was a model that worked very well, and was designed very much for the old incremental innovation model with very well-defined development programs. Today, the focus is very much on specialty medicine, on small patient subsets, and there is truly the opportunity to shape a product, and there are countless options to shape a product. There are faster market approaches. FDA nowadays is also much less of a hurdle than competition and reimbursement. In many spaces, FDA is very helpful, actually. What one needs to keep in mind always is, the more you move along the development path and the closer you get to market, the data you will have generated in phase 2 and phase 3 are the data with which you will launch the product. So they will decide upon commercial success. You need to make sure that the data you need for reimbursement, that the data you need for commercialization are being generated in phase 2 and phase 3. That requires actually a different kind of thinking that one could call market to product. You see pretty much the same graph as in the slide before, but the arrows are pointing in a different direction. And what that means is that you need, for product development today, you need to think backwards, basically, of what you need in order to get reimbursement, what you need in order to compete, what do you need in order to get FDA requirement, and design your clinical trial program accordingly. Now, that again sounds very trivial, but I can tell you from my experience that biotech companies and even large pharma typically doesn't think along those lines. They think very much more along the sequential development model that I showed before. They think very much about technology, how to let's say maximize the value of their technology, so that they really take technology as at the core of their thoughts, much less so than market needs and competitive needs. Pharma, by the way, and biotech is kind of unique in that. I mean, if I explain my thoughts to someone from outside of the biotech or pharma industry, people get it immediately. because products are typically developed very much for a market or market segment. Yeah. In pharma and biotech, we're developing products very much based on the technology. So, I'm very much convinced that we need to move from that sequential model very much to a market to product model, like the one depicted here. An additional argument in favor of this is, or there are two additional points. One is, and that's again true in particular in oncology, they're very fast to market approaches. I mean, they're drugs that have been approved based on phase 1 trials. And in that case, you would need to be really prepared for all the reimbursement and competitive landscape that meets you at a very, very early stage. So I mean, and obviously, oftentimes P1 is phase 1 is being used for signal generation. When you're looking for a signal, you inherently make already a commercial decision, because I mean, there are certain signals you look for and certain signals you don't look for. There are certain patient populations you include, certain patient populations you don't include. Those are inherently already commercial decisions. And I think one needs to make those decisions very deliberately and in a very strategic manner. The second point why it's important to think along those ways is that nowadays investors, particularly the best VCs in the field, think exactly along those lines and understand very much that products need to be shaped according to competitive needs and reimbursement needs. So with that change in how the development is being conducted, the mindset of developers needs to shift. It needs to shift away from a focus on FDA requirements. What I see very often in my practice is that clinical development people still nowadays tend to be very much focused on FDA requirements. And no doubt FDA requirements are critical still today, but they're not sufficient. Addressing FDA requirements is not sufficient. You need to prepare your company for competition and reimbursement needs. What is critical today is differentiation. And I mentioned that today products can really be shaped. There's a lot of flexibility shaping the assets you have. It requires creativity in order to do so, finding the right niches, finding the right use of your drug. Why that is relevant, one other example is if you compare pricing and reimbursement today and the value generated by PD1, PD-L1 inhibitors compared to hepatitis C medication. You will all remember the many discussions about the pricing of Sovaldi and Harvoni when Gilead launched. The truth, however, is that the 84,000 or whatever the therapy costed at the beginning was cut probably in half by the time the third competitor came to the market, which was within a year's time frame. The reason for that is that all new generation, so to speak, hepatitis C drugs are very much comparable and compete directly. That enables commercial payers and wherever applicable providers to play one against the other and obtain price concessions by doing that. And that worked very well. So we don't know the price exactly, but we know that the price for this generation of hepatitis C medication has come down to well below 50%. Now, let's take PD-L1 inhibitors for comparison. there are 5 on the market, a 6th one to be launched. Prices are still where they used to be. The reason being that they're being used in different combinations and they're being used in spaces that are not directly comparable. So you might have 2 PD-1 inhibitors that compete in one particular space, but not in the whole, in the set of indications that they are effective. So by creating a couple of individual niches that are not directly competing, at least not all directly competing with the competing drug, you make it impossible for payers and providers to negotiate price, essentially, which is a good thing for the companies involved. Probably a less good thing for the payers. What is critical is to use creativity to find the right indication, the right patient subsets that optimally leverage what is special about your drug. Yeah, it's critical to understand the properties of your drug, the strengths and weaknesses, and to focus really on those areas where the drug is unique and works best. If that area is small, that is fine. I don't think one needs to go into big indications necessarily. Another element that is very critical is rigorous proof of concept trials and trial designs. What I see very often is that companies have been around for a while. They have raised money. They ran a lot of clinical trials, but none of these clinical trials does really prove that the drug works. That is an issue. It's worthwhile thinking about that before you start a trial, what the likelihood is for that trial to show and to really nail down that your drug works. With all that I mentioned above, from an organizational perspective, it is really important that clinical and commercial capabilities are being merged or come together. There is need for commercial input into development programs, even at an early stage of clinical development. Just very quickly, to prove that indeed differentiation and innovation matters. This is a list of the 15 most successful launches in the last 5 years or so. I've color-coded them. Everything in blue is a first-in-class, so that's actually more than half. Everything in green is second-in-class, and everything in purple is differentiated. And you see that in order to end up on this list, you either need to be first-in-class or second-in-class, but if you're second-in-class, you need to be differentiated. If you're differentiated but not second-in-class, that may also work. There's only one exception in these 15, that's Victoza, Novo Nordisk, diabetes drug, that follows pretty much more the traditional commercialization story with leveraging the franchise, leveraging reasonably large field forces. Everything else has a very, very clear innovative edge. And when I mean innovative edge, I'm not talking about marketing differentiation. I'm talking about meaningful innovation that creates a meaningful difference in patients' lives. Very quickly, I'm convinced that many of the drugs that fail could actually have worked. But companies that developed them didn't take the rigor or didn't take a rigorous enough process to determine where the strengths of their product really lies. There are a couple of points that why drugs fail that are worthwhile taking into consideration early on in the development process, right from the beginning. One is what I would call large indication trap. I heard over and over again that, well, my drug works in, let's say, prostate cancer. It's a large indication. Yes, indeed, it's a large indication, but it's one that is very competitive and that has very many options nowadays. And that goes with high cost of trials, long trials, and a very high risk. The second point is referring in particular to phase 3, changing endpoints, changing design from phase 2 to phase 3. Sometimes that's needed, no doubt. But one needs to be very much aware that this comes at the price of very high risk, ignoring safety signals very clearly, changing endpoints, portfolio logic that probably doesn't apply to most smaller biotechs, but if you have a broad portfolio, broad pipeline, you can make choices, you can eliminate assets that are relatively weak compared with the others, and you will end up with, in an average, better assets. If you have only 1 or 2 assets in your pipeline, then you might have the biggest breakthrough ever, or you might have a relatively weak asset that is not very competitive. So the point here is try to compare as much as you can to external similar assets or to the competitive field. The last point, go where everyone else goes. No differentiation, no creativity, if you like. So the way to be successful in general, wherever you can, wherever that applies, I would always prefer a biomarker-driven approach. So choosing in a rational manner, in a manner that is linked to the mechanism of action, the subsegment where an asset works best. Orphan indications that are less competitive, have a high need, continue to offer very good opportunities. Even large companies go that way oftentimes. Obviously, combination, in particular in cancer care, is one of the paradigms going forward, in particular when it comes to immuno-oncology. That being said, the painful lesson learned is that combinations are very much preferable if they're combining assets, 2 or more assets that have some single agent activity. I'm always very skeptical about combinations with an asset that hasn't proven single agent activity. Opportunity in using non-standard endpoints. FDA is working on that a lot and offers more and more opportunities in that regard. And finally, finding an underserved setting within an indication, within a clinical area that could be supported by meaningful surrogate endpoints. The point with all of that is shape your drug. Shape your drug according to what it does best. Be creative. Find the niche for your drug. And that is also that speaks directly to development strategies. Be rigorous when it comes to proof of concept trials. That can be single agent trials, that can be control trials, targeting populations that leverage your mode of action. There are various ways to do that. Just thinking about that, making sure that you increase the likelihood that you indeed nail down proof of concept is critical. Clinical design, phase 2, phase 3 design. We talked about the choice between larger versus smaller indications versus the choice between all comers and a biomarker or otherwise enriched populations that typically increase the likelihood of success. In the case of cancer, it more than doubles the rate of success. Relevant endpoints, and finally also finding the right sequence of programs. if you start in a relatively small orphan indication with limited patient numbers and limited sales potential, it doesn't mean that you could not go into a larger indication. So there is a sequence of for a development program that can help you contain budget, your development budget, reduce risk, starting with what is most likely to work as opposed to what gives you the largest sales potential. Find your niche. That's really what it comes down to. It's all about leveraging the uniqueness of your asset, creating a meaningful impact on patients' lives, and finding the spaces where competition is somewhat limited and where you are able, from a budget and capability and time perspective, to execute on a clinical trial program. So that is basically what I wanted to share with you. Plenty of opportunities. The name of the game is innovation and differentiation. Need to develop or change the development mindset away from an only regulatory perspective to real innovation and competition, differentiation focus, and thinking backwards from what is needed in order to be successful in the market is, I think, the framework that we should apply. So this is basically what I wanted to share with you, and I'm more than happy now to take some questions. And Chris, how do you want to organize the Q&A?
Well, thank you. This is great. And thinking backwards and forwards, we have a number of questions in the chat box. Please feel free to add them, and we will get to as many as possible. I'm going to share one with you, Roland. And first of all, thank you. That was really, really, I love that kind of granular, it's a huge discussion and you've made it really clear in a granular way. So thank you for that. Here's a question from the field. What do you think are the main entry barriers for repurposing drugs in the rare diseases market? How a small pharma doing it can protect its work from competitors, or how can it? Can a small company protect from competitors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually even on the board of a repurposed asset company. I like repurposed assets. I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to. I mean, the protection, I mean, the biggest protection you have is most likely the orphan drug protection in the US as well as in Europe. So that gives you 7 years in the US, 10 years in Europe, in addition to whatever patents you can have. In particular in the US, the patents that are not substance of matter patents are very effective and can provide you with pretty long exclusivity period. That is less so the case in Europe. So there you typically have the 10 years and that's about it. I don't know whether that addresses your question.
And Antonio, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to unmute yourself and clarify a little further. You have a number of questions. If you'd just like to ask the next question, we can invite you to speak up.
Hello, I just unmuted myself.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Hi there. Yeah, my question is, I know companies, several small pharma companies that are trying to repurpose drugs that in some cases are out of patent. Their strategy is to get the orphan drug status once they pass clinical trials against a rare disease, to get orphan drug status, but I'm not sure how effective that, let's say, protection is against competitors, because what if very soon there is a generic and physicians prefer for some reason to prescribe the generics? I mean,
okay, I get it. Yeah, no, that's a good question, and sorry I didn't address that straight away. I mean, one question is dosing and formulation. So, I mean, if you have a drug that is entirely identical with generics on the market, then that makes it somewhat more difficult. So the recommendation would be to find to increase the hurdle somewhat. Yeah, and that could be by picking other dosages, and it can be relatively minor variation of dosages, and finding other formulations, yeah, that can better be protected. Now, granted, that will not eliminate all competition, all potential generic competition, but there is a big difference between Europe and the US in that regard. In the US, physicians tend to prescribe the drug that is being approved by FDA for a given purpose. In Europe, in many geographies, they don't care very much. In the US, if, let's say, you have a repurposed drug that is approved by the FDA for a rare disease, and you use the generic instead, you potentially run litigation risks. You don't typically have much of a reimbursement hurdle, so payers pay for the repurposed drug. So there's not really a strong incentive, and there are strong disadvantages in prescribing the generic instead of the approved repurposed drug. So that's not 100% certainty, but it is usually it is probably good enough to secure you a reasonably large market.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Very welcome.
Did you want to ask another question, Antonio?
Yeah, I have tons of questions. I could be here until tomorrow. For example, I would like to know your opinion about reimbursement in very new, drugs based on very new technologies like gene therapy. Science works with this technology, but I mean, we have seen very recently marketing problems for some of these drugs. How do you think that this will be solved?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, first of all, I think, let's say, payers are very conservative in general. Yeah, it takes a long time for them to get to come up to speed. I don't think that, and so the reimbursement model for gene therapy still needs to be optimized in a way. The way I think it will work, it works right now, is pretty much a variation of lump sum upfront payments and some potentially some annual payments. I don't think that is necessarily the way things will be in 5 or 10 years from now. What the US is particularly good at is different parties working together and financial providers, if you will, finding models that address the needs of various parties. So what I mean with that is, if you have, let's say, gene therapy for hemophilia, as a payer, in general, you don't care much about, even if it costs $1 million or whatever, the budget impact is very limited. So in general, they're reasonably relaxed. I wouldn't say relaxed, but I mean, it's not a major, but they're concerned because they think, well, there could be 10 more of those. So the interest of the payer would be to not have the lump sum upfront payment, in particular since patients have an average tenure with one insurance carrier of only 2.5 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So they are really interested in the 2.5 years, and then really not interested in paying anything beyond the, let's say, without getting the benefit within those 2.5 years. So the way, and conversely, biopharm is interested in exactly getting the upfront payment. So one could think about financial providers coming in and building a product that would convert the lump sum payment into, let's say, a 10-year payment stream against a discount they would get from the manufacturer. So the manufacturer would get, instead of, let's say, $100, would get $80, but would get it all up front, and the commercial insurance would pay whatever, $10 a month, a year, instead of $100 upfront. Yeah, something like that. I think there will be models like that.
Okay. It makes sense.
We had Chris, I think, has a question or two. Chris, would you like to come on? And
yeah, thanks. One little hot spot on that slide where there's the pyramid, and it's the blockbuster prices going up to the personalized medicine and the customer base versus price increase. Just kind of got my head turning on a question. So we all know that personalized medicine is kind of the direction everybody's looking, and we know it's going to happen and it's inevitable. But right now there's not really the technology to make it widely available and applicable in the scale that we want it to be. Do you see this? I mean, what's your opinion on this future market of personalized medicine, you know, where essentially some of these personalized drugs could be down to blockbuster prices due to technologies being able to efficiently produce these personalized drugs, and how that could affect the market, kind of that high price point being gone. And if so, do you see this happening in 10, 20 years, or even more, even sooner than that?
Well, that's an interesting question. When I talk about personalized, and that may not be the right notion, actually. I mean, and I don't know whether what I don't have in mind is something like CAR-T, where a drug is essentially produced for a single person.
Okay.
That is a model, this autologous model is problematic, and I don't think that will become mainstream anytime soon.
Okay.
Certainly not at the current price point. And companies are working on that, on off-the-shelf allogeneic CAR-T. And I think that's much more likely to be the solution. What I was talking about is having treating and that's again an example from oncology. So you have a number of drugs that are approved to treat a single mutation, and the approval is for that mutation, for treatment of that mutation, independently of the clinical indication. So it can be in breast cancer, it can be in colorectal cancer, it can be in brain cancer. Yeah, and the common denominator is that it's a reasonably rare mutation, and if as a patient happens to have that mutation, that patient will benefit from a particular drug wherever the tumor is. And that is a pretty different approach to even targeted therapies, where you had, let's say, a target that was shared among many patients or most patients with a certain clinical tumor. Yeah. And so what I if I had to imagine how the world will look like in a few years, I think there will be combinations, novel drug combinations of maybe 2, 3, 4 drugs, and some might be broader targeted and some might be very personalized. So there may be, let's say, a targeted VEGF inhibitor combined with one of these drugs that work in a certain mutation, and that may be combined with whatever PD-1 inhibitor. So that's more how I would see the world evolve. That from a cost perspective is still a burden to the system, but not quite as much as truly therapies made for one individual, such as CAR T.
That's great. Yeah, my mind just started, I heard personalized and I started running off towards the dream, where artificial intelligence and automation are kind of making everything we need. But I guess that would kind of be the end of biotech. But sorry for that confusion.
Any other questions?
Great. Antonio, would you like to take the last question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask you a very specific question. From a strategic point of view, for a very small pharma company that is planning its pipeline for the future, is there any rule of thumb or any way of having a good idea of the cost of a future drug? I mean, if I know the prevalence of the disease.
Yeah, I mean you mean the price of a drug or the cost of development?
Sorry, the cost for
the drug.
The price, yes.
The price. Well, we're in the US, we're pretty free with regard to pricing. It's really we are free, full stop. The only limit to the pricing is competition, and let's say the way payers can leverage that competition. That's really what limits pricing. And while the way this is managed is not very efficient, it is fairly effective, as the hepatitis C example shows.
Mm-hmm.
I think what in the long run and a number of institutions are driving in that direction, like ICER, but also certain medical organizations such as ASCO or academics, is to tie the price to value, value-based pricing. Now, that obviously is also easier said than done, but I think as a general, but what you can do, you can compare alternative therapies, even though they might not be directly competing, and see and assess the cost effectiveness of treatments. And that is the way I would look at pricing also for rare diseases. So what is really the value that is created for patients, whichever way you measure that, in QALYs or in whatever the disease areas and whatever the drug does, and compare that with, let's say, what's in the market, and what is considered to be cost effective. And that is probably the best indication you can get. In general, payers look at the world based on budget impact. That's why they are very much interested in talking about prices for cardiovascular drugs or Alzheimer drugs or whatever. And they're kind of less excited about rare diseases that have an impact only in aggregate. So only if you take all the rare diseases together, would that create some meaningful budget impact. but not really individually.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Dr. Molina. We're so excited that you have moved yourself to the U.S. and look forward to seeing you and the rest of our folks on July 18th at the Rare Disease Symposium. Be kind of a launch for all of us. Thank you so much, Dr. Turck. This was a really wonderful presentation, and I want to thank everybody for being here. We will be posting the recording and the slides in a few days, and we'll see everybody very, very soon, we hope. Take care.